Chapter 22. Shonda. Shonda's heart stopped when she heard the gunshots. They had to be looking for her, and she knew she had to keep the gunmen away from these kids before one of them got hurt in the crossfire. "Where are you going?" Yolanda asked as Shonda headed for the pediatric entrance. "We're safe in here. The doors lock automatically to protect the kids." Shonda shook her head. "We're only safe until they realize where I'm at. Once they know that, they'll be shooting out the glass to get to me. I can't let them hurt the kids." "You can't know they're after you. It could be something else." Shonda had filled Yolanda in on her story, just in case something like this happened, but she'd hoped nothing would ever come of it. She should have known better. "It's too coincidental for it not to be about me. Maybe if I give myself up, they won't hurt anyone else." The thought of heading to the gunfire scared her completely, as did the thought of never seeing Dante or Deacon again, but she'd never be able to live with herself if innocent people were killed because of her. She wondered how Deacon did this, headed into danger, and she tried to channel his thoughts as she approached the only thing keeping her safe. Before Yolanda could say anything else, Shonda pushed open the pediatric door, made sure it locked behind her, and then headed toward the lobby where she figured the gunman was. None of the elevators were working, so she was forced to take the stairs, and they felt eerie in the silence. The hospital was usually bustling and noisy, but now it was as if everything had frozen. When she reached the first floor, her heart was pounding, both due to exertion and fear. Shonda had no idea if all the doors locked or only the ones on the pediatric and NICU floor, but she had to try. She tugged on the handle, and the door opened silently. Stepping through, she paused long enough to listen to determine where the shooter might be. "Where is Shonda Turner?" Shonda blinked at the angry female voice. A woman? She certainly hadn't expected a woman. And why did that voice sound familiar? "I've already told you we don't know who you're talking about." Shonda didn't recognize this voice, but she could hear the tremor of fear in it. "And I've told you that someone better start talking or I start shooting." Shonda couldn't let that happen. She stepped into the lobby, ready to announce her presence. But as she saw the woman holding the gun, she froze. Marlene? It couldn't be Marlene. Why on earth would she be after Shonda? "Marlene?" At the sound of her voice, the woman turned toward her, the gun now pointing at Shonda as well. "There you are! Nice of you to join us before I had to kill these nice people." Vaguely, Shonda registered the group of doctors, nurses, and patients huddled in the corner, but she couldn't focus on them because she was still so shocked at seeing the woman in front of her. "What are you doing here?" "They arrested him, and it's all your fault." Marlene's eyes were wide and wild, and though Shonda still had no idea what was going on, she knew she had to keep the woman talking. "Who did they arrest?" A snarl distorted Marlene's features. "You don't even know? Oh, that's rich. Benny gets thrown in jail and you get to prance around scot-free?" "I'm sorry, who is Benny?" Shonda was trying to follow along, but she had no idea who Marlene was talking about. And from the crazed look in her eyes, Shonda wasn't sure Marlene did either. She had always seemed so kind at the therapist's office, but now Shonda wondered if perhaps she was the one who should have been at the appointments. "Who's Benny?" A strangled laugh escaped her throat, and she turned back toward the group she had been addressing earlier. "Do you hear that? She got him thrown in jail and she doesn't even know who he is." She turned back to Shonda. "Benny Goldman, the governor's son, is that ringing a bell for you?" Shonda hadn't even known the governor had a son. She didn't pay close attention to politics. But that would make sense. The governor was up for re-election later this year, and he wouldn't want the public to know his son had a drug problem. "Benny was the guy I saw do the fentanyl exchange, wasn't he?" Shonda asked. "Exchange? You make it sound like he's some sort of career drug dealer. He'd only done a few, and that was his last one. He was doing it to save up enough money that we could get married. Then he was going to stop, but you had to go and ruin it." Through the windows behind Marlene, Shonda saw the cops approaching. She didn't know what their plan was, but perhaps she could keep Marlene talking and distracted. "Why did he need to save money? Isn't the governor wealthy?" Marlene sneered. "Yeah, the governor is. But he didn't approve of me, so he wouldn't give Benny the money. Of course, once you went to the police, he realized I could be an asset." "I don't understand. How could you be an asset?" "Because I worked for Dr. Nelson, and I knew that not only was he related to the Goldmans, but he had racked up a substantial debt from gambling. I'm the one who suggested he pressure your job to force you to attend therapy. Dr. Nelson isn't good for much, but I knew that I could hypnotize you and make you more susceptible to his therapy." "You're the one who hypnotized me?" Marlene shrugged. "I learned how in high school and got pretty good at it. I figured it was worth a shot. If we could make you either forget what you'd seen or at least question it, then we could make the whole thing go away. And it would have worked, too, if that man hadn't shown up with you. I took one look at him and knew he was trouble." Shonda shook her head. "Deacon came because I called him. I knew something was off with Dr. Nelson. I just didn't know what." Marlene scowled and spat out a string of curse words. "I should have known he would get sloppy and mess it up. He breaks everything he touches." Shonda saw the first police officer appear behind Marlene and knew she just needed to keep her talking a little longer. "Who did I call the other night? Was that you or Dr. Nelson?" "That was me. The first thing I programmed you to do was call and tell me your location if you missed an appointment. That way, if you had gotten suspicious, I could come and take care of things, which is what I'm doing now." "Drop the gun," the police officer said, and while Marlene turned to him, Shonda ran and hid behind a desk. "No, you drop your gun and leave, or I'll start shooting people," Marlene said, and pointed her gun at the group she'd been threatening before. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," another cop said, this one from behind Shonda. Shonda couldn't see everything from her hiding place, but she could see Marlene and the resigned expression on her face when she realized she had no way out. She hesitated a moment longer, but finally she sighed and dropped the gun. The police swarmed forward and took Marlene into custody. Only when her hands were cuffed did Shonda come out from behind the desk. One of the officers stepped toward her. "Are you Shonda Turner?" Shonda blinked at the officer, surprised he knew her name. She certainly didn't recognize him. "I am. Why?" "I was told to look for you and make sure you were safe. Evidently you have someone outside very worried about your safety." "Deacon? Was Deacon here? But how would he have known? Is it Deacon Jackson? Can I go see him?" "I can't let you leave yet until we ask you some questions, but as soon as we secure the building, I can bring him in." "Thank you. Do you know if my son is with him?" The officer shook his head. "I wasn't told about a kid, so I don't think so." Shonda wondered what Deacon had done with Dante if he wasn't with him. Surely he wouldn't have left the boy home alone. He was only 8 and in an unfamiliar town. Maybe he'd called a friend or taken Dante to the firehouse. That still unnerved her a little because she didn't know those people well, but she trusted Deacon and he trusted them. The officer led her into an examination room. "Wait here and someone will be in to take your statement.
I'll get your friend in as soon as I can."
Shonda thanked him and sat down in the chair. She wondered if this meant that it was finally over. If Benny had been the one she'd seen and he was in jail, could she finally stop looking behind her and jumping at shadows? But she didn't get to consider the question long before a different officer stepped in and asked to take her statement. Shonda answered each question as honestly as she could, and before the interview was finished, a knock sounded at the door. It opened, and Deacon's head appeared.
"Is it okay if I come in?"
he asked. The officer nodded.
"I think we're about done here anyway, so feel free."
Deacon sat down next to her, and it was all Shonda could do not to melt into his arms. After a few more questions, the officer excused himself, and Shonda turned to Deacon. "What are you doing here? How did you even know? And where is Dante?" Deacon took her hands.
"Dante is fine. He's at the firehouse with Cassidy and Bubba. And as for how I knew, I'm not sure you'll believe me."
"Try me."
"Well, I got a call from Eric that Dr. Nelson and Benny Goldman were arrested. He thought that was the end of it, but as I hung up the phone, I saw a man out my window. It was the same man I'd seen in Baytown several times, the same man who let us out of the warehouse. And when I went to ask him who he was and why he was there, he motioned for me to listen. Once I heard the sirens, I knew you were in trouble, and then Cassidy called and said she'd heard about the shooter over the police scanner. I dropped Dante off at the firehouse and then rushed over here."
"What happened to the man?" Shonda asked. "Who is he?"
Deacon shook his head. "I don't know. When I hung up with Cassidy, the man was gone."
"Gone? Where did he go?"
"Not sure of that either. He has a habit of disappearing every time I see him. I don't even know his name."
Deacon's brow furrowed.
"I'm not sure I've ever even heard him speak."
Shonda didn't know what to make of that, but she was grateful that Deacon had come, that he was here with her. "Is it done then? Finally over?"
"I think so."
He squeezed her hands and chewed on his bottom lip.
"I know we haven't really talked about it much, but will you stay? I don't think I could lose you and Dante again."
The same question had been running through her mind. She'd only been at her job a few days, but she did like it here. The HR department was definitely nicer, and so far she liked her coworkers. Plus, what was there to go back to, really? Nothing but her house and bad memories. She looked back at Deacon and smiled. "I really think I want to stay,"